My novel is called The Invisible Mountain. It's my first novel, a labor of love of 8 years, and it is set in the country of my origin, Uruguay, or Uruguay. I've come to say Uruguay more often because if I say it's about Uruguay, people say, oh, you're from Hawaii? I say, no, that would be nice, but that is not, in fact, at all my story. So it's set in Uruguay, which is, so now if I say Uruguay, I know you'll be with me. Which is an absolutely beautiful South American country that is very, very small. 3 million people live there. It's just, you know that Brazil whittles down to a tip, and just below that tip is Uruguay. It's not Paraguay. They're very different. And so here was this country that was at my origins, was at the root of me, that my parents carried around within them with nostalgia and longing and also this sort of closed sensibility that they weren't going to go back, and that I had not lived in my life. And so there's a combination there for me growing up of a longing for home and the kind of fascination that is born of distance. And I was just reading in Miami, and some women who grew up in Uruguay who are my age came up to me afterwards and said, you know, you observed things about Uruguay in your book that we would never have noticed because they're everyday commonplace to us. And the interesting thing about place, like culture, they say it's like a fish to water. You don't see the water around you if you're a fish. It's just constant. You can't even fathom the water. And so when we write about place, sometimes the process is about either coming out of the waters and seeing another place or plunging into the waters, which for me, going back to Uruguay 3 times in the course of writing the book, I was able to see things that were fascinating to me, that to my cousins and aunts and little nephew were absolutely everyday. So the book was born from that kind of longing and desire. And it was also about writing my way into places that don't exist anymore, which is the settings of the past. Because when we write things that are set in other periods of history, we don't have those places anymore. And as I think we well know, places change. They evolve. Boston is a city, for example, with such an incredible history. And the Boston of today is not Nathaniel Hawthorne's Boston. If we were to envision Nathaniel Hawthorne's Boston, what would you use? Where would you go? My book is set in the generations of my parents, my grandparents, and my great-grandparents, following the women primarily throughout the 20th century through various social and political as well as personal upheavals. And so it was going back and imagining as well as doing research. So I did the more formal, traditional kind of research, reading books, and then went back to Uruguay and got my hands on all kinds of books, and friends gave me dog-eared books from their own collection and said, here, take them, tell our stories. And I also did the other kind of research that I think is critical to a novelist, that I think Anita Shreve was also speaking about, which is very informal and creative and also sensual, which is walking down the streets and smelling and listening and looking and seeing people and envisioning what their interior landscape might be and who their ancestors might have been and what they might have been like. All of those things go into the process of creating fiction, which is something so beautiful because we can, I think, through fiction often get closer to the truth of a place or a historical place than sheer historians who have to actually stay with actual veracity, and so they can't imagine their way in as deeply as we novelists get to, and have the joy, privilege, and also responsibility to do. And so the other thing I'd like to remark on about the beauty of place in fiction is that people live, places live within people as much as people live within places. So when a person has a relationship to a place, if you are an immigrant, how many of you have lived in another country before? Okay, so those of you who just raised your hand may relate to the notion that in other places that you have lived in, it's still in you. You still carry it. You carry its senses, its flavors, its rhythms of time, its visions, its images, and those are with you. They're inside you. The place is inside you just as much as you were at one time in that place. The process of writing this book brought Uruguay into me so that the longing for Uruguay was replaced with a beautiful intimacy. And the process of writing this novel became a long, urgent, sprawling love letter to the city of Montevideo, the capital, as well as to the nation itself. And immigrants in particular can bring nations with them wherever they go. And that's a beautiful thing about fiction, that as writers, we get to create life in different places, and as readers, we get to imbibe those places through the act of reading. We get to make those places that may have once been foreign part of us. And so I'm going to read very briefly from the book to just give an example of a particular moment in the text where the place comes to life. And again, this is set across the course of the 20th century. At this moment, it's 1985, so later in the book, and there's a character who's a revolutionary called Salome, and she's based on a childhood friend of my mother's who actually did join the revolutionary guerrilla movement called the Tupamaros in the 1960s, and then she was imprisoned under the dictatorship and tortured and raped for 14 years, and this was a history I wanted to deepen my understanding of. So this is set when Salome has left the prison, and now she's back in her mother's house and sort of hiding out and trying to grope her way toward recovery. In September, when spring dried the sidewalks, Salome left the house for the first time. She took a long walk through the city, Montevideo. Montevideo, city of echoes, city of worn shoes and worn faces, city of clear sun on crumbling stoops. They hurt her, all those streets, with their familiarity and also how they had changed. Their hushed alleys, their sweet cobbles, the peeling paint, boarded windows, shut down stores, moldering buildings, cracks in the ground, faded street signs, hopeful bowls of flowers up on balconies, vanquished flowers shriveling on sills, the fragrance of chorizos charring, slow and rich and futile in empty cafes. The dictatorship had changed the nation. She had never seen her city so empty. The few people she passed looked like ghosts just returning from the dead. She walked through Barrio Sur, past her Tia Channa's old home, toward the river. At the shore, the city seemed to loosen its belt and breathe. She sat on the ledge overlooking rocks and water, brown water, silty, rippling, reaching all the way to the horizon, to the end of Uruguay, where the rest of the world began. She roved it with her gaze. The breeze roved her skin. A man walked by behind her, and she could tell, without a doubt, that he too had met the machine, La Máquina. They stood, the two of them, silent, apart, breathing each other's presence, watching the river catch the broken light. Thank you.